Hey, you're listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness through pop culture. I'm Black Nerd Magic, and on this episode, we are talking about 2020's horror film, Spiral. And no, not Chris Rock's Spiral, the Book of Saw, but Spiral. I hope you enjoy.
This has been a movie that I've been anticipating talking about because I feel like this too is like kind of like a natural progression to the conversation that got started in Moonlight. I don't know if you felt like that, Celeste, but like this film definitely kind of shows like the negative aspects of people's like bigotry towards the LGBT community, whereas like Moonlight was a kid kind of like trying to come to grips with his sexual identity.
Yeah, I feel like that this film is more of, you're seeing just how the mainstream society, how they looked at homosexual people during the mid-90s, back when it was the Clinton administration, back when we started to see the Christian right start to have an influence in American politics, back when homosexual people weren't able to get married. It was just a really dark time for anybody who was willing to come out of the closet. I mean, we had laws in the military that said, don't ask, don't tell, as far as, hey, you may be gay and all this, but we don't want to acknowledge that you're gay. So don't say anything about it and we won't ask about it. I mean, it was a very tumultuous time. And I like that this film was set during the 90s. It gave it kind of a more, I would say, historical and kind of a nostalgic feel to it, especially with the production design and the outfits that the characters were wearing and just the mood, the climate of society when it came to the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, and we'll jump into this as well. But before we get into jumping into this, there's two things I have to say right off the bat. First off, this movie is streaming exclusively on Shudder right now. So if you guys are not Shudder members, you guys can try. I think there's like 7 and 30-day free trials out there. Highly recommend it. If you guys love horror as much as I do, it is definitely well worth every penny that you pay a month. But much like my love for horror, our guest also loves horror and has quite honestly one of the best podcasts that is out there running right now, from the Black Women Are Scary podcast, coming to us way of our friends over at Ghouls Next Door. Thank you guys for the recommendation on this one. Please welcome Wimoto.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for that wonderful intro. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. So I always... It's really weird because I don't know if you're going to take like an insult to this or not, but like I like your show because it feels like kind of like creepypasta. Like it's
Yeah.
It's like that internet horror stories that they're short stories and it's anthological, so you guys are showcasing like an author like every month, and I'm probably doing a huge disservice to what the show's about. So if you guys can you just tell our listeners a little bit about what the show is?
That is exactly right. We do showcase an author every month. So the show is really dedicated to BIPOC horror authors, and we just want to be a hub for up and coming authors and new authors and new scary stories. Is in the intro and the outro of our podcast. So that's really what it's about, just shining a spotlight and providing a platform for authors, because it can be very challenging in the publishing industry, which is still fairly homogenous. To get your work out there. I mean, you write the work, it's great, but then you've got gatekeepers that just don't really even understand your references. So this is sort of my way of combating that, of being like, well, come here and we'll read these things and we'll produce it and we'll shine a light on you and let people know where to get your work, or the independent publishers that service you. So we also partner with indie publishers that celebrate the same thing of just diversity in speculative fiction in general.
And one of the things that I've personally had like a goal for this year has been to expose myself to more diverse voices in horror. I feel like it's really easy, like when you talk about the quote unquote greats, you're always talking about like George A. Romero, John Carpenter, just a lot of essentially white guys, and that is slowly starting to shift to where you're starting to kind of get, you know, more and more diverse voices. Jordan Peele's a great example of that. You know, when you talk about modern horror, everyone will, 9 times out of 10 they're going to talk about Get Out or Us because they were such mainstream, such influential pieces of art. So much so that Jordan Peele, I think, is kind of overshadowing his director for Candyman, whose name Nakasta,
Nikki Costa, right? Nikki DaCosta.
I think that would be close to it.
But yeah, so it's I think we're starting to kind of see a change in horror, and I really appreciate that. And having a show like Black Women Are Scary is able to really bring that message to a forefront. You guys don't even, it's not like, oh, hey, we're just gonna like read you a story. It's like, we're gonna make this like a full-blown production. Everything feels like an audio book, and so I'm kind of like curious about like why you guys decided to kind of go that route and make it really as theatrical as possible.
Well, both Jimenez Garcia, who's the co-producer and director, we have theater background. So if you believe it or not, my undergrad is in music theater. So I actually used to sing show tunes and things like that. So because I think we're coming from that space, initially Black Women Are Scary was meant to be live. It was meant to be dinner parties that we recorded. So we would have people over and we would read scary stories and just talk a bunch of shit, like kind of like, if you remember Are You Afraid of the Dark, the beginning of that, where they're like sitting around the campfire and they're like, I'm going to tell you a scary story. Like it was going to be that, but then COVID happened, and so we were like, well, we can't have anybody over because that's crazy. And we started to think about the podcast format and audio dramas and radio work. And so just kind of like the theatricality of telling a story to someone, I think, is what we really wanted to lean into and really have that vibe of like, we are telling you a scary story, like it's a campfire or someplace spooky, you know, and giving that to you wherever you are in the world, via your headphones or however you're listening to it. Also, there's a lot of podcasts that talk about horror and they do it very well, and so we didn't feel like we had anything to add.
Sure.
So we said, well, what is it that we would be bringing that's different, that's new, that really plays to our strengths? And that's kind of how it ended up being this fully produced radio drama.
Yeah, and you guys just wrapped up your first season as well, so huge congratulations on that. And later in the show, we'll actually tell you guys about how you guys can donate to the second season upcoming. But I think one of my main questions about curiosities when originally I was told about the podcast was how you guys decide to like kind of do what stories you guys end up doing. Like what's the process for like if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, I have a perfect story that would be perfect for this, and I align with your vision as far as like, you know, your demographic and what you guys want to do. What's the application process, I guess, for you guys?
Oh my gosh, please do send your stories to duskyprojects@gmail.com. We're always taking submissions. We put out some open calls and got things that way, and we also partnered with Midnight at Indigo, which is a publication that publishes a lot of different genres. They don't necessarily deal with speculative fiction, but they do support women of color writing. That's like their jam. And then Mocha Memoirs Press was another publisher that we partnered with that specializes in diversity in fantasy and sci-fi and speculative fiction as a whole. So we went to those folks and said, hey, we're doing this. Do you have authors that you would recommend? Or do you have an anthology that you're putting out that you want people to know about? And they were like, yes, and of course. And so a lot of the stories were from those anthologies. The Midnight Indigo put out a speculative issue just last year. I think it's just called 22 People of Color Write Science Fiction. I forget. It's like an anthology of 22 authors, all women. And so some of the work that we produced in our season was from that. And then Flay, which is a vampire noir anthology, is the one that some of the stories we used for Mocha Memoirs Press. So these two are constantly putting out, supporting those authors and being, again, like another hub where it's like, hey, you can find this new work, you can read it. And so we just kind of went with these other gatekeepers and said, what you got? We need stories. But we are always open to just folks just sending in. We have criteria, so it's, we can't go past 5,000 words, so they got to be 2,000 to 5,000, short stories. Our episodes are usually like 30 to 45 minutes tops. So that's like as much word count as we can handle producing. And we don't really do erotica. We don't do like horror erotica. We don't really do hardcore gore either. So like if you do really gory stuff, like that's not really for us. And we have this thing where we like there to be some sort of resilience going on, some kind of triumph that happens, or because we already broke that rule, so I can't even say that that's like what we always do. But definitely we love any stories that's taking a trope and turning it upside down and turn it on its head. So. And
I've only listened to like a very select episodes, and I can't even tell you which episodes I've listened to. But like I'm planning to like slowly working my way through the catalog right now, and I like there are some stories that like horror is one of those things that's like you have like Celeste and I were talking about this before we started recording. Like you have like really solid like prestige horror, and then you have horror that's it's very niche, and I feel like horror is kind of the only genre that really does that. And I appreciate that you guys are putting out content that's not just, oh hey, like the for fans of like Halloween, you're going to love this, or for fans of Get Out, you're going to love this too. But it's like we're going to go into like hit the sci-fi guys, where we're going to hit like Children of the Corn and stuff along those lines, so that way you guys are creating a diverse thing and really embracing what horror is all about, and being a collective, just something for everyone kind of genre.
Yeah, we really wanted to celebrate. I mean, I really love horror and all of its facets. And there's some horror that I like more than others, but I'm always open to like convince me. Like I'm not a huge fan of slasher films, but maybe I just haven't seen the right one. Like I'm in that kind of space where it's like, please show me, tell me what you got, and I'll change my mind. I also really didn't want to be producing a podcast where it's just like, here's all the stuff that I like. Like, I really wanted it to be like, this is a celebration of writers in this genre, and this is really about the craft of this work. So we have a little story committee for that. And essentially, if you become like a regular donor, you can be a part of the story committee, which means that you then are reading these things that we're considering, and you put in your 2 cents. So it's not really like, I just didn't want it to be the Wimoto favorite list show. Like I want other folks to chime in, and they make the recommendations, and if there's enough unanimous like this story, then it goes. Like it's not really about my taste necessarily, or my like preferences, I would say, because I definitely have some. So I'm really glad that you said that, because that is a part of the mission, is to really embrace like horror in all its subgenres. Like we still haven't done steampunk. I'd like to get more westerns. We haven't done fantasy yet. Like I'm like, I want to touch these other spaces that horror reaches out to.
Yeah, when you are like creating something, it's interesting because like you are so focused on like what you like, but then you're like, oh, there's an audience past myself, and it's like, so like when we were curating our this list of collection of episodes for Celebration of Diversity is a great example of this, because like there were some movies that like Celeste had that he really wanted to talk about, and I'm like, well, I've never seen this movie, so like I'm just gonna take your word for it. And then there were movies like what we're talking about today with Spiral and Blade 2, which is coming up at the end of the month, which is one that I really fought for. Are you doing the trilogy or just the first? We're just doing the first one. Okay. The trilogy might come later in the but right now it's just Blade 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Blade Trinity cannot be included into that podcast. It can't be.
I don't know. I just did a rewatch of all three because I was like, remember when? Oh my gosh.
I mean, we can put it behind a paywall, Celeste. We did Justice League, so
better. If you want to be tortured enough, then pay. You can pay for it, and then go down the morbid rabbit hole that is Blade Trinity. But I digress.
Yeah. So the last thing that I want to talk about is because we believe in community, and it's one of the things that I've really admired about just kind of the brief interactions we've shared on over social media. Is you guys the first Friday of every month, you guys do what is called the Macabre Mixer. As of this recording, I've not been able to attend one yet. But it's in my future. I feel it. I feel it in my bones. It's in my future.
Do them every month. This is why.
Can you briefly talk about what the Macabre Mixer is?
Yeah. So again, in the spirit of this germ of an idea for Black Women Are Scary was meant to be a house party. We were like, how close can we get to that in the middle of a pandemic? Because we launched our first episode, I think, in June of last year. So the Macabre Mixer came from that, of like, how do we get this house party feel? We went to a bunch of different online events. There's a lot of things going on there online. Of course, everybody's trying to connect. And found a platform called Gather Round, which sort of simulated that intimate feel where you can like make up games and play a bunch of stuff with folks one-on-one. You can also do things in group. So it really lended itself to the vibe that we wanted. And the Macabre Mixer is that you get like a little Q&A with the author, and then we play a bunch of games based on their work, and the author is also involved. I have like some questions that I send to them, and they tell me what they want to talk about. Things. I ask them things like, "What do you wish people would talk about when they spoke about your work, or when they speak about this story in particular?" So we can really gear the conversation to be in the vibe and the theme and in the vein that the author wants and that we want. It's really a way for folks to get together, kick it. Talk about this thing and talk about a bunch of other, I'm assuming subjects, because I'm not involved in all the conversations. Like you get to have get into a little breakout room and just, meet somebody new. We curate that experience so it's easy to do that, because it can be, I feel like there's a lot of horror nerds where social settings are anxiety inducing, so we wanted it to not be that. We wanted to be like, how can we make this a positive and welcoming experience? But also, I feel like a lot of the times when these particular writers, or when you're a creator of color and you enter a space and people want you to talk about your work, you end up really just kind of get bogged down in identity politics. Like a lot of the questions are around that and not necessarily the work. So I really wanted to hold a space where it's like, no, we're really going to talk about the craft of what it is that you do.
I love that on numerous levels, and I can't wait to attend it. But real quick, before we get into talking about Spiral, where can people find more information about Black Women Are Scary?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram. We're one of those podcasts that are on Instagram. So Black Women Are Scary on Instagram. We're also everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So Anchor, Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, Pocket something or other. All the things. We're there. So please, just any place, rate and review. Black Women Are Scary. That's us.
We'll also have links in the descriptions below where you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. But let's talk about Spiral. And this movie is, I think I might be the only person on this call. I guess I can't speak for you, Wimoto, that has seen this movie more than once. I saw it last year, reviewed it for our website, and I gotta say, like, second time around, I feel like it packs a lot more of a punch. I feel like, especially when you're looking at it through some of the lens of what we're going to be talking about here today versus like actually looking at it through a critical eye, and it doesn't waste any time. Like, it really pulls you into this the scene. This film opens up on two gay guys just in the back of a car, just enjoying their best life, living their best life, and just making out, and then basically car pulls up, and to, like, I think it's like four guys end up like pulling these guys out, and they're homophobic and basically just beat the guys, and then leave them for dead. And then you find out that it's all memory, and we kind of fast forward into modern day. And I mean, this opening, like, it is lingered and woven throughout the tapestry of this movie so incredibly well. And I feel like it really helps us connect to Malik so incredibly well. It's tragic, and like Celeste was saying, like, it's very much a sign of the time, and even still, we still see this in our streets, and just kind of wondering, man, I'm so excited to talk about this movie. Let me just say that.
I'm excited to talk about it too. This is my first time seeing it, just so you know. So I was excited that you wanted to talk about this, because I had wanted to watch it, and I was like, oh great, this is just the excuse that I need. I thought that I mean, it opens with a hate crime, and I thought the use of that as like a, what trauma can do to a person, and have that be this central point in the plot that sort of moves the film along, that gets you into the state of mind for Malik. I also thought the way this movie was shot, like the actual cinematography and the lighting, was really...
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now, and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Suburban life, where I'm like, where there were times when there was like nobody on the street, and then there was somebody on the street, and I was like, who lives here? Does anybody live in this place? It just felt so isolated. It felt so remote, and I really got to like sit and ponder, like, why do people live in Suburban? There was a lot of time for me to think about things. I saw you unmute for a minute, Celeste. You look like you were about to say something.
Oh, you're good, Wimoto. Hey, everything you said, I agree with. I totally agree with. Actually, you took whatever I said was out of my mouth. So, I mean, but I mean, jumping onto that, I would say that, opening up with this hate crime already sets the tone for what this film is really going to be about. The horror is going to be there, but that's not what's important. The main idea of this film is that we're talking about the experiences of a gay man, not just a gay man, African-American gay man in America, and the battle he has to face on two fronts. Not only does he have to face the battle of being a black man and the oppression, the systemic issues that come with that, but he also has to face, being a gay man and, being seen as a disease, being seen as a scourge, being seen as not even being a human. They talk about there's this scene where the radio people, I think it was like a person who was probably a conservative or someone who was on the right, and they were talking about, hey, these people shouldn't be in God's country. They are abomination. It says in the Bible that these people, it's not what God would want for a man to be. A man's supposed to be with a woman, not a man to a man. And me and Josh have talked about in a previous podcast about how people love to do interpretations of the Bible. They like to fit it and put it into the text and the lens that they like to see through it, so it validates their ideas. And we can see that Malik, if you take out him being gay or him being African American, he's really a cool guy. He's a guy who's working on a spec script. He's a screenwriter, not a screenwriter. I think he writes books because I think he was ghostwriter. Ghostwriter and everything. So he has goals, he has ambitions, and I love that this is an interracial relationship. I have not mostly seen an interracial gay relationship in a lot of the films I've seen dealing with the LGBTQ community. So that was a fresh breath of fresh air to see. And I saw that the Caucasian gentleman, he was looked to be a lot older. It looked like there was like at least a decade separation between these guys, because Malik still looks like he was in his late 20s, and then the older guy looked like he was in his 40s. But it seems that they chose to leave the city because they were facing a lot of stink eyes there, and they were facing a lot of discrimination, and they wanted to get out to a small town and maybe build their lives together. And you see they have a daughter there too. Another thing we don't see is that a gay couple will usually have a kid, and if you see it in the film, it's usually just put off as just like this little background tidbit that doesn't get brought up again. But I like that the daughter is also a very important part of the story. And we see what she has to deal with other kids saying like, hey, how does it feel to have two dads, or where is your mother, why did she abandon you, like how does it feel to be like, or saying like, just like really cruel stuff, or like, oh, do you have AIDS because you have two fathers? It's just very ignorant. And the film is filled with a lot of social commentary on that front, and also some horror for the people out there who are looking for a scare. So I'm good and ready to dive deep into this, because while it does have some good points, there are also some things I wish they were kind of fleshed out a little bit more.
Yeah, totally.
I guess before we get into the deep nitty gritty of this, to your point, I'm going to turn it over to you back in a second. But this film is filled with so much of that commentary that I feel like you don't even really need the horror aspect of it. Like the whole like cult and cannibalism feels like an afterthought when you think about this movie and what it's saying and how bold it is in its delivery. Cause I think you brought up points that like I didn't even consider, the interracial relationship between Malik and Aaron. Like, to me, I guess like I have never seen a LGBTQIA movie deal with interracial. It's always one race or another, and this movie does a really good job at setting that up, and the two of them have terrific chemistry. I really like the way that you have the daughter right in the middle with Kayla. I think that's such an interesting component into this film, the way that it is, because it allows you to see how parents who are in the LGBT community, how their kids actually have to process dealing with other kids, and Colin talking about, oh, you have two moms, you have two dads, and the 90s are kind of really where that really kind of started to peak. I mean, this movie takes place in 1995. We're not but a few years from like the big breakout, episodes on like national television with like Friends in the coming out episode and Ellen's big coming out as well. So it was like the tide was really starting to turn around this time. But again, I don't think people ever kind of thought about kind of what that lifestyle ever does to kids growing up in that environment. And I love that scene in particular where it's her and Tyler playing the video games, and he basically turns to her and says, "Oh, so you're the girl with the two dads?" And she goes, "Oh, here we go again." And you just kind of see how that really weighs in, but she still really loves Malik. She still really loves Aaron, and kind of doesn't really care what people think based upon that. But Close, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to let you air your grievances on what you didn't like before we get into the meat and bones of this.
So speaking of meat and bones, we agree that the meat and bones is based on the social commentary about homosexuality in the United States. I just kind of wish that the horror aspect, as far as sacrifice and this cult, that was sacrificing, these couples and, these vulnerable groups of people every 10 years. I wanted to get more information into that. I never even knew what this cult was called. I never even knew why Homeboy, the kid, was eating the daughter towards the end. I didn't know what was going on with that. I didn't know, like, how exactly does the son and the father still look the same after all these years? Like, is it something that, does the sacrifice keep them young? Is it eating these people helps them get fresher skin? I never got that question out of my head. And I also just didn't like that they would paint, the gay couple that was murdered. They use them almost as like jump scares in this film. Like the little girl that was murdered, she comes in a couple of scenes and just runs towards Malik. And I was like, okay, she's trying to kill him, but she's like handing him like videotapes and leading him to this information. I was like, well, why do you have to be scary doing that? Like you could have just been an angelic little spirit coming like, hey, go right here, go to this house and go right and find these tapes. Like it could have been something like that. And for me, I usually do like when horror films are short, because short and sweet will always be better than long and overdrawn. But I wanted some more minutes with this film. I think this film would have been more hard delivered with a lot more minutes dedicated to not only the horror aspect, but also to more of the commentary with Malik. I feel that Malik as a character, he never really gets fleshed out. Like, we know what he does, we know about his background and everything, but we never really get insight into who he is. And mostly the film, we're just dealing with his reaction to everything on the outside, and not really the internal struggle that he's fighting against. They do a couple of scenes where they show it, but it's not an ongoing thing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying with that. I really loved this aspect of the film where I really love that Malik suffered a trauma and he wasn't okay. I feel like a lot of the times when you have a traumatic thing happen to fill in the blank minority, they always are somehow like, there's like some quiet resignation or some kind of like tough exterior or some kind of like, and then they soldier on. And I really loved that Malik was like messed up from watching his boyfriend get beat to death in front of him, as one would be. And he was not okay. And so we begin the film with him already on pills and already kind of like maintaining or navigating anxiety is what it looked like. And I'm like, I really dig that this is your protagonist, that like you're basically saying these things happen, people do this to other people and it lasts and it hurts and they're not okay and they don't just get over it and like do a drag show and they're fine. Like that's not how that works.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, you have this like great psychological thriller that's going on with him, where for a lot of it I'm like, is this even really happening, or is this all in his head, right? And in that like space, that was really exciting about the idea that maybe none of this is real and it's all like Malik is losing his mind. I definitely felt like there was a lot of questioning, and there's a lot of him questioning like, is this really going on? But there was a lot of things that were confusing to me as well about that, because then it's like, no, it's real, and they are a cult. And so, yeah, you never really find out the name of the cult. I assume that it's Satan. I made a lot of assumptions. I assumed that it's Satan. No one said that, but I just kind of assumed it. I assumed that they were eating these people because they were living, because they were the same age every time. So I'm like, so they're ghouls? Okay. But like, no one ever really tells me. the whole like cannibal part of it. I also kind of wondered, like, why does Satan automatically equal cannibals? Like, is that even a true thing? So, like, questioning, you know, like, I gotta ask Satanists, like, do y'all actually eat people though? Is that even like in the book, or did somebody make that up? So there was that too. So I kind of feel like they do like a lot of things, and maybe it would have been great if they had like taken one of those things off and just focused on like, it's a psychological thriller, or it's about cannibals, you know, because it sort of splits the focus. Malik was talking on the phone to Liam, and I think Liam is the dead ex-boyfriend, isn't it? Like, did I get that right? I'm not sure. I feel like no one actually really said it, but I think that's what happened. And he's talking on the phone to that guy, to that dead guy from like early on in the film. So was he being drugged at the top of the movie? Like, there's just a bunch of questions that I have where I'm like, when did they switch out the pills then, if he's talking on the phone to a dead person pretty early on? And I knew that those phone conversations were weird because I never saw that phone in any other room in the house. And then he just stuck it in a box in the garage. So I'm like, I don't think you're talking to anybody. So for like most of this film, I was like, Malik is losing his mind because of this trauma that he hasn't dealt with. And then he turns out to be right. And I was like, oh.
No, I think to your point though, it is the unresolved trauma. There's two scenes in particular with him and Kayla, where the very early on when they move into the house, he's showing Kayla photos of him and her dad in drag, and he says, choosing to live a life loud and proud is about the greatest thing that you can do in this life. And so you can see that he's definitely like repressing a lot of this trauma that he is undealt with, a lot of like the hatred and that he has experienced and gone through. Like, this is something that really just doesn't ever feel like he does. And then the more that all of this weird stuff starts to happen, and you kind of see how the present is recycling the past, and how those two stories and experiences are running parallel with one another, you slowly start to see that he's starting to kind of be forced to face this trauma again. There's another scene in particular too where he is him and Kayla are in the car, and it's kind of right near the point where he's like on the cusp of like really breaking, and he kind of like reverts back what he says. He's like, look, I told you once when we first moved here, live your life loud, live it proud, and it's just not a safe place for people to stand out. And watching that again on this second rewatch, like that line in particular, like not only does it really kind of really sum up his entire traumatic experience as a character, but I think it speaks volumes to how we handle BIPOC people in the LGBT QIA community, and just people that even seem different than us. We automatically judge them for X, Y, or Z reasons, and we're just not wanting to get to know them. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this movie, is that we're kind of getting to see it from a traumatic point of view, to understand what that does to your mental health, to experience those hate crimes.
Yeah, and this film kind of shares a DNA thread with Get Out. You know how in Get Out there's a second place, and it's meant to put somebody into like a state of consciousness where they're there, but they're not seen or heard. And the second place is a manifestation of, with black people, throughout all the years and the centuries, who have told the world about the brutal things that's happening to us, like racism, lynchings, and police brutality. Like, we keep speaking up about these issues, but it's like no one is hearing us. And I feel that for Malik, when he says don't speak up, it's not a safe thing to do. It's almost like in a way he's being silenced again. Anytime that it comes to a problem in this country that is a big social ill, such as the treatment. Like recently, we've had the mistreatment of Asian Americans in America and everything. Anytime anything like that is brought up, then you'll get the common rebukes. Well, all lives matter, or like racism doesn't exist, or well, like they'll point to a problem that's going on with that certain group and like, well, if they were like this, then they wouldn't be like this, or they wouldn't be treated like this. And it's another way of trying to shut somebody down and keep them without a voice, because the truth is hard. The truth is hard for many people to hear. People still want to live in a fantasy that America is this country that is a melting pot, and it is a melting pot, but that we're welcoming of the melting pot, that we welcome the tired, the poor, the hungry, and, people who are coming from worse situations overseas. They feel like that this is the best place to come because they can have the best opportunity to make something of themselves. But once they get here, then it's almost like they never left the country that they were at, because now they're facing not only a physical battle, they're facing a mental battle. And, we see that once again from the hate crime standpoint. We live in a country where there's people here that are so afraid of homosexuality that they're willing to kill somebody. They're willing to hurt somebody. They're willing to put someone down, in order to keep the scourge, as they so call it, away, to keep it erased, to keep it like it never exists. And Malik, outside of the horror, he's facing a real horror. He's living in a world that doesn't want him to exist. And how do you deal with that? How do you come to terms with that?
Yeah, and just to kind of echo what something that you said, we talked about this last year too, with in light of the George Floyd murder and kind of the Black Lives Matter episodes that we did, is that people talk about how the All Lives Matter campaign, or worse yet, you have those that are kind of just going with the stand up against the hate crime because it's cool. It's the cool thing to do. And I don't know, like that to me like seems like just as bad as the hate crime itself. It's like I'm just trying to do it just for appearance, and it's like, no, man, like your lips and your heart are so far from one another.
I love that you bring that up, because one thing I do, not one thing, one of the many things that I loved about the way that this film was crafted was the really apt use of racist microaggressions that were all over this movie, and also like embedded into their marriage. This is one of the few films where you have, I feel like it's playing into that trope of like a family moves to the suburbs, something is wrong with the neighbors, and now we're in too deep and we're trying to get out alive. I feel like that's a lot of stories, but very few times when I watch those kind of films do I even really think about the marriage of the two, the family that's centered. And in this one, I really thought about their marriage because of so many choices that Malik made, and the way that race, sort of was this moving target between the two husbands. So I'm thinking of the scene where the neighbor comes over and she said, "I saw your gardener, and so I thought I would come over and say hi." And he said, "My gardener?" And then he has to correct her and say, like, "That's my partner." So she immediately assumed that was somebody who worked for him. And then, then he says that, and you're waiting for like the other shoe to drop. And she goes, "Oh, how exciting." Like that particular kind of, when you're exoticized in a place, like what you were saying, like it's almost just as bad as, and it's like, yeah, being on the receiving end of that is also just this icky feeling. When you go to a place where people are excited that you're there because of what you are and not who you are, because they think that's going to make them seem like more woke or something by just being in your proximity. So these kinds of moments that he has, the neighbor, initially I feel like they play the weirdness of the cult that's going on as possible racial discrimination. Like when he comes outside and he's like throwing something away and he says hi to his neighbor, and his neighbor's just like, and like walks away. Nobody says anything, but the actor does a really good job of like, oh, great, racist. Like I definitely, as a person of color, was like, oh, it's like a racist place. That's what's going on. Like it's, for a minute, you don't know that it's going to be this other like supernatural thing. Like you just think that like it's racist neighbors for quite some time with these little digs that they do. And as things get weirder and weirder, you know, especially when he talks to that guy and that guy's like, seems so pleasant and seems so for the, you know, for LGBTQIA rights and all those things, like the two, you know, heads of the cult that live next door, and Malik's like deep suspicion of them, and then his husband not really seeing it, and right there, just that particular math of like, I don't think he's genuine, and the husband being like, but I do, and no one ever says it, but it feels like you don't see it because you're not black. Like it almost, there's like this undertone of racial microaggressions and the way that race like plays or messes with the dynamics between the husbands, even though they never like really just come out and say it. It was very nuanced, and I liked that because that felt real to me. Like you're not gonna like have these like in-depth conversations all the time because you're married and like you're tired and you're brushing your teeth and stuff, you know. But it did sit there between them, and I wondered a lot about their relationship because Malik didn't tell him. He didn't tell him about the vandalism. He didn't tell him about these things, and I was like, really, you're not gonna tell him? So it made me wonder like, how come he doesn't trust him enough to tell him these things? And I started to like spiral out there. I don't know if anybody else that like struck you, like their actual marriage and the things that Malik didn't say.
Oh no, I've noticed the same thing as well. Like, I mean, it felt like their marriage, like it starts off very good, and then these things start to happen, and then you're expecting Malik to run to Aaron and tell him like, hey, these things are going on. Like, this is what I'm finding out. I'm being unsure about this, but you see Aaron kind of rebuke him, and it says, he's like, hey, you got to get to know these people. Like, these people are very, very nice. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, dude, this is your partner right here. This is your spouse. Like, I mean, you can't go against your spouse. Like, no matter how much you may like these people, if your spouse is telling you something about how they're feeling, you got to take that in consideration. And then, you know, once like it turns out that Malik is somehow framed, and like I guess they ended up like creating these pictures where he like had like affair with another man, then Aaron just immediately gives him the boot. I was like, dang. He was like, you know what? I want you gone by the time I get back. And I was like, not even a chance for him to explain himself. He just got the boot.
Yeah, I was like feeling a way about Aaron. I was like, are you in on it, dude? Like, what's going on? And also like, I was like, Malik, how come you didn't tell him about the vandalism? Like the vandalism, like if that had happened to me, I would have told my husband, I'd have told my in-laws, I'd have told my mom, I'd have told the internet, I'd have taken pictures. Like everybody would have known that we were vandalized and there was like a slur on the wall inside my house. Like I would have left so many times. Like, Malik, you don't want to leave? Like, I just, that part right there, that choice to not tell him, I was like, you guys have a crappy marriage. Like already, so like now I'm worried about you. Like now you're in the suburbs and you're in a bad marriage. Like what's going on?
I think too, to your point of, you know, there being kind of like these like subtle like racism like tones throughout the course of this. I also think that Aaron kind of has never had to go through the trauma and bigotry that he's gone through, that Malik has gone through, because he was married, he was heterosexual at some point, and, you know, we're led to kind of believe that this is still something new for him, that, you know, and kind of he just looks like the suburban ideal of, you know, what a white man is going to be in 1995. And, you know, again, because, you know, he never sees him and he never sees all of this, you know, stuff that goes on, partially because Malik doesn't tell him, but yet somehow like warns the people that live in the house 10 years later. That to me didn't make any sense. You know, but Celeste, to your point, like I am going to always consider my wife is always something that comes first. You know, if she tells me that she needs to talk, it is okay. My phone's away, my electronics are away, my attention is fully yours. And
Right.
you know, that is the key to a successful relationship, whether it's a marriage or it's, you know, it's a long term or it's just starting out. Like, if you want something to last, and whether it is a romantic relationship, a blood relationship, or it is just a friendship, listen to that person and take their feelings into consideration, and trust that they're also going to listen and hear you. And instead we have a character that is just can't confide in his partner because his partner can't really see, and that is kind of also the sign of toxic relationship as well. You know, it doesn't seem that way, but as it keeps unfolding, you know, there's you know, we've put out a lot of content that is bringing awareness to you know, victims that have gone through sexual assault. And I've never experienced that. You know, I can't ever say I know what you're going through. I know how you're feeling, but I can certainly listen. And the scene where Aaron and Malik are kind of like looking out across out the window, and you know, he goes, oh man, he's like, oh, I thought we were over this. And it's like, trauma is not just something that you can just put a band-aid on. Like, trauma is something that's very triggering, especially if it is homophobic in its nature. You're going to have so much of those regressions come out, and you as the partner, whether you've experienced it or not firsthand, still need to be supportive.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Why do people like scary stories? For me, it's always been about resilience. Horror stories are brave new worlds where anything is possible and anyone can triumph. I'm Wimoto, by the way, host of Black Women Are Scary, the podcast that celebrates people of color writing in horror. We produce short horror stories every month to spotlight BIPOC authors, sound designers, and publishers. Make a tax-deductible contribution this month, and your support will go towards our second season with new authors and new scary stories. Come face the monsters with us.
I agree with everything. Yeah, I'm just echoing what you're saying. And I also enjoyed that part that they made that choice, right? That the writer was like, I'm going to make this like flawed marriage here with these two. As you said, no one ever really said it, but you got the impression that Aaron has passed. I think there's like a passing narrative. Aaron has passed for a long time. Aaron is now, I got the impression that he came out late. I got the impression that Malik might be like his first and only like real anything with a man. And I also got the impression that Malik is like on the opposite side of that spectrum. So then there's like this kind of like street cred, if you will, for lack of a better term, between the two of them, where I'm like, Malik like really knows what's up, and Aaron, like, you don't really know what's up. Like, this is just, and without any, again, the film does a great job of like telling you these things through action without actually like having anybody like make them like do a monologue about it or anything like that. It's just all in the way, the willingness that Aaron has to just like believe things at face value. I was like, dude, but where's your spidey sense? Like, surely you've faced some homophobia. Like, what's going on? Like, how come you can't pick up on these things? Like, I was like really frustrated with him. And it was where I was like, is he in the cult? Like, what's going on? But he was just like new, I think, or inexperienced. He didn't like know the things that Malik knew. And that, I feel like that sat between them.
Yeah, there's a not only a generational divide between Malik and Aaron, but it feels like to me Aaron is still struggling with being a gay man, because remember, Aaron was the guy who had the American dream. I mean, he had the wife, he had the kid and everything, and he fit what mainstream society would like to see. And now that he's gone and become who he is, it feels like he's still struggling with accepting that. Like, I don't know, that's what I got from the narrative. I feel like it's a man that he wants to be this guy, but he's not truly understanding what it takes to be this guy. I mean, there's a reason why they moved away from Chicago. It wasn't just Malik that was facing discrimination. It had to be Aaron too. And, you know, how this affects his daughter, how this affects even the way his ex-wife may look at him, you know, how this affects the people he may work with. I mean, you know, I was hoping to see more things involving Aaron, because I felt that he could have been a very compelling supporting character outside of Malik. Malik, of course, gets the main focus, but Aaron is a very interesting character in himself, not because it was shown for him to be an interesting character, but because of the, you know, the different dimensions that are going on in his life and how him being a homosexual was affecting that.
I think you bring up a great point that Aaron probably at some point did go through some sort of homophobia, but it was never to the violent degree of Malik. Malik had experienced, you know, literally watching someone that he loved and that he cared about die before him. And like, he still like holds tokens and reminders, and it's like every time that there's a dream sequence in this, it's always him replaying that nightmare. And so I think for Aaron, he's not really going to understand it to the degree of, you know, it would be, I don't know how to like compare it, but it would be like, you know, I feel like there's a difference in you know, abuse and in trauma when you call someone, when you verbally abuse someone versus when you physically abuse someone. And Aaron kind of, not Aaron, but Malik really lives in this world of, you know, just toxicity, basically, because he has all of the, like, the things that are going on with the cult. But, you know, we haven't even touched on this yet. Like, he's ghostwriting for a guy that is basically homophobic in his own sense. Like, they show like several scenes where he's like the traditional family unit, it's everything. And in 1995, that was a man, a woman, a child, or more children. And then like so much of it, and he's writing a book on conversion therapy. You know, psychologists who believe that you can cure gay, or that, you know, homosexuality is something that is a psychological disorder, which has been disproven several times. But it's interesting that he's constantly just involving himself in this cycle of toxicity and doesn't really turn to anyone about it. It's almost kind of like this like cautionary tale that, you know, if we're going to have any chance of seeing the suicide rate in the LGBTQI community break or lessen, we have to really align ourselves with allies that we can trust and people that are going to, you know, truly stand up and have our backs and not be, you know, to the degree that Aaron is in this movie, we're just going to pat you on the back and everything's going to be all right. That's why Victims and Villains, like, we really pride ourselves in being allies for the LGBT community. We really want to, you know, hear you and listen to you when you talk, and try to make sure that we're connecting you with the right resources like the Trevor Project, so that, you know, you don't have the same demise or go through the same traumatic experiences as Malik.
Yeah, I love that you said all of that, and yeah, you do start to. I agree that this could have used more minutes. Like what you're saying, we needed more time with Aaron. I wondered why he was so gung-ho. And I mean, at one point, Malik even says, like, flat out, like, what's the word for Uncle Tom but for gay people? Like, I was like, whoa. So he's clearly not or disappointed in his partner's advocacy. And it does almost kind of feel like Aaron is, you know, going back to the things that people need to do to survive. Like, he is kind of passing in some way, or, you know, still, like you said, hasn't really accepted. He's still a little closeted. And I guess it seems as though he's like, I'll live with you, but, like, we'll have straight friends and we'll kind of, like, live this sort of straight life, even though it's two guys, but we're like, we'll be just like them. And there's some of that pressure, I think, that just kind of surrounds the whole story of conforming, of assimilation in some way, even I think with the choice of moving out to the suburbs. But as you said, then it gets a little loose, right? Like, there's some parts where you're like, what is the cult? Why did they do it? What are they called? How do you save the people in the future again? Like, that part you're like, wait, huh? And then that, I wasn't even sure about that book. Like, I'm like, is he ghostwriting somebody who's like, I'm happy that you brought that up, because that was how I saw it as well, that like, oh, he's ghostwriting somebody who like hates gay people. That was like a thing that was happening in the background. Just that he's spending his time doing that. That's his job. Right?
It's literally like the worst possible position you can place yourself in, especially like someone like Malik that has gone through this trauma and is potentially like reliving that trauma, moving to the suburbs, and also having conversations with Liam, his dead boyfriend, and at the same time also not having a good foundation in his marriage, or in the very least his relationship with Aaron, to even really be able to trust him enough with this. Because like you said, like he's gay, but he's approaching homosexuality the way that he did when he was in that traditional American marriage, that ideal of, as the movie says, like the traditional family unit. And I feel like that's really what is kind of ends up being the downfall of everything for their relationship.
Yeah, and not only do we see that, we're seeing the idea of conformity and assimilation, and also we're seeing how this relationship is kind of being impacted, by the issues of being gay and having to live in a country where it's not really tolerated as much as it was now. Now it's kind of like more open-ended, where there's a lot of progress being made, but back in the 90s was kind of limiting time. But we're also seeing how a country can exploit its own people, because once we get to the end where we understand what this cult is doing and why they're sacrificing these people, I mean, the head guy talks about, hey, like, it's all about fear. We're all about selling people an enemy, an invisible enemy that they have to be afraid of. So you're gonna rot in jail, because people are not only going to judge you because of what you did, but because of who you are. Like, you're a black man and you're gay. I mean, you're two of the things that America fears. So, we can go ahead and pin this crime on you, and nothing will happen to us, but everything will happen to you. And then we see towards the end, there's a new family moving in, and they're Muslims. And this is right in 2005, 10 years. And guess what happened in 2001? 9/11. And, while people talk about that America came together and that, we saw each other as brothers and sisters, what I saw is that we saw a lot of anti-Islamic, a lot of anti-Muslim, a lot of anti-Saudi Arabia. We saw a lot of that racism and discrimination and stereotype draw right up. I mean, I remember watching films during that era, like, for one, Malibu's Most Wanted had a character where it was played for laughs, but the guy, he was a Muslim and he had a rocket launcher. And these were jokes that were made in Hollywood during this time. So imagine what that Muslim family has already gone through, and imagine what they'll have to go through with this cult. But maybe Malik CD will be able to help save them. But it's always a cycle. When one enemy becomes, I guess, more accepted, then another one gets made. In the 90s, it was homosexuality. Now, once that became more accepted, now we're going to look at the Muslims. And now what we see anti-Asian Americans. So there's always seemed to be, for the powers that be, a group of people that has to be exploited for fear in order to keep things going the way they are.
Also, too, you have to remember that before Malik and Aaron, you had the two lesbians with their daughter that also got sacrificed in the midst of the AIDS crisis. But I feel like this movie, like, I see where you're coming from as far as, like, 9/11 and kind of like the rise of, like, anti-Islamic and Muslim that we kind of saw unfold after that because of fear and just our own ignorance. But I feel like that kind of undoes, like, a little bit of, like, the movie's like LGBT vibes that it did so well up to that point. Like, I was honestly expecting, like, another, like, LGBT community or couple to move in with their own kid. How did you guys kind of feel about, like, that ending, going from two back-to-back sacrifices with the LGBTQIA couples and then going into a Muslim couple?
Well, that part, the third act in general, the film stayed in such a great, like I said, it really was coming across to me as a kind of psychological thriller, and it stayed in that vein right up until, like, the last 10 minutes, right? So he finds the tape, and then he's like, oh my God. And then there's those people behind him, which I thought that was such a great shot of just all of the neighborhood in the hood, in that, like, stark suburban lighting, motion lighting. I was like, that's wonderful. And again, going back to what you said about wanting more minutes, yes, we needed more minutes for this because this felt very rushed. Mm-hmm. Where suddenly it's the only time in the movie, a movie that's just, like, all innuendo and nuance and, like, micro this and vibe and undertones. Like, it's very subtle what they're doing with all of the things. And then they just, like, hit they pull out the hammer at the end. Like, that guy shows up, and for the first time, we have a character that's giving a monologue. Like, he just tells us what they're going to do and why they're going to do it and how they've been doing it. They don't show us or nothing. Like, it's the first time in the movie that happens. He just says it, and he's like, the tide is changing. That's fine. There'll always be a new one. And suddenly this is a film about, like, the longevity of hate. And I was like, oh, okay. And that kid is eating that girl. I had so many questions about the child. And to your point, the ghost that kept showing up to help him. I was like, this ghost is trying to tell you something. What about that family? What about that ghost? Why the kids? Why is it always a daughter? Did her being, and she mentioned that she was a virgin, and then he was like, I wanted to be special. I'm like, is this what he meant when he, like, opened up her chest and ate it? Like, did he needed her to be a virgin? So it has to be, like, a gay couple and a virgin kid? Like, that seems super specific, and I need more information about all of that. Like, because you could have just let the kid live. Like, it seemed important that they had to, like, eat the child too. So I'm just like, and somehow this has to do with the longevity of hate. So that felt a bit thin, like that, or at the very least, like, maybe, like, take 20 minutes with that, because there was, like, no violence, no, like, gore violence, and then suddenly that girl was opened up and that other guy was like eating out of her chest, and I was like, this feels like a lot real fast.
Yeah, I mean, this film just does the equivalent of going 0 to 60 in like 5 seconds. Like, you know, there was a nice like little smooth pace to it, and you know, we were starting to get some answers. Then all of a sudden, go straight to like the guy eating the girl, and when I first saw it, I was like, what is going on here? Like, I was like, you don't really get any answers to what is going on in this sacrifice, in this ritual. And then the ending gives it to you. Like, I don't have a problem with showing how this film is all about the longevity of hate, because that's something that's still going on. But then you all of a sudden show this Muslim family, and I thought the whole time these patterns were going on, that these gay couples were getting sacrificed. But then all of a sudden we see that there's a Muslim family that's probably going to get sacrificed unless they get to that CD in the attic. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, you know, it would have been nice if maybe in the past, like maybe in the 30s and 40s, like, hey, there was this family, you know, and they were like a Mexican family, and then they got sacrificed, and then there was like a black couple, then they got sacrificed, and then there was this gay couple, and then boom, 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 you kind of showing all of these people, these vulnerable groups of people getting sacrificed. But no, in the beginning, we were just seeing a gay couple. So I thought, okay, this is all about, you know, the LGBTQ being sacrificed, you know, and being kept out of society. But then all of a sudden they switch it up with the whole Muslim family, and, you know, the focus just kind of goes awry from there. And then, you know, it's kind of an underwhelming resolution, because all we just see is just Malik just in the jail cell, you know, and he's giving us an exposition dump about everything that's going on, and he's hoping that somebody goes and sees the CD. But then the way they do it is that they have the girl move into the house, and she looks up at just the one like little gray area in the ceiling, and that's going to compel her to go and look in the attic. I was like, all right, I guess it just felt a little bit too convenient for me. Like, maybe Malik could have hid it like somewhere in plain sight, and then somebody would have checked it out. But I don't know. I felt the movie just kind of ended a little bit anticlimactic, and it kind of ran out of room to wiggle, and it kind of ran out of ideas to really go with and know how to finish out the story. But overall, I mean, I think it has a lot of promise, and it's very good, and not very good, but good, and I recommend it to people to watch, especially people who are in the homosexual community, because we often don't get multi-dimensional homosexual characters in film. I mean, it's starting to improve, but that still is a group of people that are being like comically created and made and exploited on the silver screen. So this film actually does a great job of showing us people with humanity, with feelings, with emotion, with dimensions. And I just wish that the horror aspect was worked on a lot more. And because, you know, you already have the commentary down, but the horror just kind of got left on the shelf.
Yeah, but they had these really great shots, like when the guy came,
yeah,
when the alarm went off, when he came in, and with the vandalism, it was great. It was a great use of like, is it you know, a hate crime, or is there something more deeper going on, like the emptiness, and then suddenly there's people and they're staring at you, or they had such great creepiness that they like sprinkled out throughout the whole thing, really build up the tension. I mean, honestly, I just would have loved like some like crazy, like eyes wide shut, long party thing at the end of it. Like, show me the whole ritual. I want to know what that swaying in the window was about, that whole thing where they were holding hands and swaying back. I'm like, are they singing? Like, walk me through it. The top to the end would have been a great third act.
Yeah, it definitely feels like you have like competing narratives where it's like, I have these like really ideas of like doing a compelling horror movie on like hate and like specifically like the LGBT community in the 90s, and then I have this other idea where we're gonna do like a cult, and it's like they have like really creepy imagery that's just littered throughout here, like the whole like swaying thing, like you're right, like it's really eerie, like especially the way that like they're look at him like watching, and then you have like that scene also with Matthew and Malik where Aaron walks in, so it's kind of like they're trying to like, he's trying to seduce him,
that weird thing.
yeah and then like the ending, like the last like 15 minutes of this, like the moment that Malik kind of has like the Sweet Six, or it shoots, I think it's Marshall at the Sweet 16 for Kayla. Like at that moment, everything just kind of starts, that movie just falls apart very slowly. And I think, Wimoto, you kind of talked about how like it's this legacy of hate that we're specifically going after, that is what keeps the cult alive, or as I think they would say, balancing the scales or whatever, but I digress. I think that looking at it through that lens helps make the movie at the end kind of make a little bit more sense, but it doesn't it still does not excuse the film for kind of like falling off the rails and kind of getting sloppy.
They just planted so many good seeds there, because it's also, like I said, it's a thriller. Like, he's trying to figure this out. So that guy coming up and being like, tell me that I gave you this thing, like the whisper thing, and then he's dead the next day. And then how long it takes Malik to just even figure out, to see what's written on that piece of paper, because at first it seems blank. So that's like this mystery that he has to figure out. And then the spiral in the garage on the ceiling. I was like, I don't know. I was waiting for those last moments of Hereditary, right? Where then the people show up and you're like, oh, this is a whole thing, and they're about to take it to church, and we get to see all of it. And I was waiting for that. I was waiting, once they were outside in the hoods, I was like, I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the singing and the, what are the steps to this, to this spell, I guess, that you're casting to be young forever? Is that what this is? Like, we never really got that part. I wish. But this film was doing a lot of other things, and it was doing it, I think, for the first time. So I'm excited to see like what the next, right? Like, you always have like the movie that's got to do the first thing. They have to do they have to hit all the marks, and they're the only film that's ever like the pioneers, right? And then after that, you get the movies that get to like actually just double down and experiment.
Yeah. I think what makes this such a standout film from last year's horror selection is specifically just all of the thematic elements and compelling character stories that you have going on here. Like I said, like the horror and like the cult feel like an afterthought, but really what brings your attention is so much of what this film is saying, that you can look at the third act, and as sloppy as it is, you can forgive it. You look at other movies that have really strong legs that they stand on, and then this fall apart, and you're like, man, like this entire movie is tainted because of this. And I don't feel that way with Spiral, and I'm so glad that I don't.
Yeah, I would say that the strengths that it has definitely outweighs the weaknesses. Because usually, if I saw a film like this, it would get like a mediocre rating. But this film is far from mediocre. There's a lot of promising things in this film, and it carries a good conversation about homosexuality in the United States. And it's featuring, these characters that are trying to make sense of this world. And, the character of Malik, an African-American, homosexual protagonist, that's not something you see often. So I admire, what it's doing from that aspect. And that's a streaming original. I think this is only a Shudder original, right?
Yes. Yeah. This movie only exists on Shudder. You can buy it on Blu-ray. But as far as streaming goes, it is only on Shudder.
Yeah, as far as being a Shudder original, this is really good. I mean, most streaming first, like movies that just come on streaming, they're piss poor. They're very generic. They're not willing to work hard enough to actually be good, and it's kind of just something that's thrown onto a service for easy marketing. But this film has a heartbeat, and sometimes the beats get skipped, but most of the time it has something to say. And hey, that's the best thing you can do sometimes for a feature film.
All right, well, I think this is going to conclude this discussion on Spiral. But before we leave, one more time, let us know where we can find Black Women Are Scary.
We're We're everywhere you listen to a podcast. So Anchor, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all those places under Black Women Are Scary. Please listen. And we're taking a little break for the summer. Actually, right now we're running a campaign. So we're raising funds for our second season. So you can find out all that information on our Instagram. Please donate. Help us continue to produce horror authors. And then we'll be coming back in the fall. New authors and new scary stories and new macabre mixers. So,
all right.
Woohoo.
Celeste, where can people find out information more from you and our friends over at Feel and Film?
You can find out me on Twitter and Letterboxd under Black Nerd Magic. You can also find me on Facebook, Celeste Davis, Caless. And as far as Feeling Film, you can catch us on Twitter. We're also on Facebook, and we have an awesome Facebook film discussion group, the Feeling Film discussion group. If you want to talk about film, have a safe environment, meet some new people, and express your love and passion for everything film, then come through. You know, we don't bite. It's a very free-flowing, very comfortable, very friendly group.
Well, it's also virtual, so if we were in person, do you think they would bite?
Depends. I can't speak for everybody. There's over 263 people in the group, so I can't speak for everybody. But for the people who I have met in there, it's an awesome group. And also check out the Feeling Film website and check out the Feeling Film podcast. We do new releases almost every week. We've been taking a little bit of a break, but we're getting back to it tomorrow.
Yeah,
I bet they bite depending on like what movie it is, right? Like, the debate about what the film is, then it can get heated, I bet.
Well, me and Aaron, we have a more friendly partnership. Like, we will disagree, but we always try to keep it comfortable with a little bit of passive aggressiveness mixed in there.
Okay, all right.
Can confirm all of what Celeste has said. Truly great community over there. It has been wonders for my mental health, and has definitely challenged my love of film as a whole. But you guys can find me at Captain Nostalgia. I'm on Instagram and Letterboxd as well, and you guys can find us everywhere you guys get your podcasts. Search Victims and Villains. You guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find past episodes, all of links to our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. You guys can also become a Patreon at that website as well, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. But until next time, remember that hope is never silent.